What would you do if you discovered that the answers you've been searching for aren't out there, but hidden within you? Like an incomplete map. Our mind holds secrets in hidden layers, waiting for the right moment to reveal what truly matters. Carl Jung once said that the greatest secret of the psyche lies in what we avoid confronting. Think about it. How many times have you felt an inexplicable restlessness, as if something were lurking, trying to get your attention? It's not a loud voice, but a subtle movement, hard to ignore. Today, we're going to explore that movement. A psychic awakening is more than a moment of clarity. It's like unraveling a mystery that involves both what you know and what you don't yet know about yourself. We'll talk about dreams delivering coded messages, shadows reflecting what we deny, and synchronicities crossing our path at just the right moment. It's not about belief, but about noticing how all of this exists in our daily lives, waiting to be understood, more than theories. This is an invitation to recognize and integrate what the mind is trying to show us every day. Have you ever felt that restlessness? As if something inside you is trying to be heard? Maybe it was in the silence of an ordinary night, or during a hectic day, when out of nowhere, you felt like something was missing, but you couldn't quite pinpoint what. That's the door, one that opens to the unknown, inviting you to step through. The beginning of any personal transformation often feels like this, a discomfort that can no longer be ignored. Joseph Campbell, a scholar of mythology and universal symbols, described this as the call to adventure. He dedicated his life to exploring stories from different cultures and identified a pattern he called the hero's journey. This cycle starts when the protagonist is called to leave their familiar routine to face challenges that transform them. And if you think about it, isn't that what we often feel when something bigger than our daily routine begins to pull us? This call doesn't have to be a grand event. Often it appears in seemingly mundane moments. The exhaustion of a job that no longer makes sense, the end of a relationship, or even a persistent feeling of emptiness. Situations like these act as sparks, unsettling our comfort zone and pushing us to question, what do I really want? Who am I beyond the expectations I carry? Awakening isn't a manual with clear instructions, but a dive into what we often avoid. It's like opening a creaky door to reveal a dark room. It might feel frightening at first, but the more you explore, the more you realize that space holds essential parts of who you are. This call is for everyone. It doesn't always arrive with clarity. Sometimes it's just a discomfort, a restlessness that drives you to seek something new. The question is, are you willing to listen? Because ignoring it is easy, but it only delays the inevitable. The moment when you'll need to look in the mirror and ask yourself, why do I keep avoiding what's inside me? Dreams are like letters sent by the unconscious, written in a mysterious language, filled with symbols that don't always make sense at first glance. And yet, they carry truths that our conscious mind hasn't yet grasped. Have you ever stopped to think about what your dreams are trying to tell you? Carl Jung, a psychiatrist and one of the leading figures in analytical psychology, believed that dreams were bridges to the unconscious, a way to access aspects of ourselves that we avoid or don't yet understand. But here's an important detail. They don't speak our everyday language. Dreams are like abstract paintings, full of images that need careful interpretation. For instance, have you ever dreamed of falling? It's one of the most common dreams, and its interpretation can vary. For Jung, falling might symbolize losing control or fearing something beyond your grasp. But it's not a fixed rule. The meaning depends on the dreamer, the context, and how this sensation connects to their life. Dreams don't lie, but they require effort to decode. Imagine receiving an incomplete map. It points out paths, but it's up to you to figure out how to use it to get somewhere. That's how dreams work. They bring messages about our desires, fears, and even opportunities for growth. But they only make sense when we look at them closely. What if the symbols in dreams were messages about what we need to face in our lives? A wild animal might represent your own suppressed anger. A dark room could symbolize a secret you're trying to hide from yourself. Often, what appears in dreams is what we're unable to express during the day. They are at once confusing and revealing. What makes dreams so fascinating is that they never cease to surprise us. Even when we don't immediately understand them, they continue working silently, showing us what we can't see. And perhaps that's what makes them so valuable. No matter how much we ignore what's hidden, it always finds a way to surface, even if it's while we sleep. Have you noticed how easy it is to point out in others the things that bother us? An irritating habit, a behavior we judge inappropriate, or even a way of being that seems to provoke us on purpose. What if I told you that often, what we see in others is just a reflection of what we reject in ourselves? Carl Jung called this the shadow, the parts of ourselves that we don't accept, don't understand, or simply prefer to ignore. Imagine the shadow as a locked chest in the basement of the mind, where we hide what we don't want to show the world. Fears, insecurities, repressed impulses. The problem is that ignoring it doesn't make it disappear. On the contrary, it finds ways to manifest itself, especially in our relationships. Think of a time when someone irritated you because of something you also do or fear doing deep down. For example, someone who constantly criticizes others for being arrogant might, without realizing it, be struggling with their own tendency to feel superior. It's uncomfortable to admit, but these projections are like mirrors reflecting what we'd rather keep hidden, not confronting. The shadow is like allowing a hidden fire to slowly consume the structure of a house. Ignoring it isn't a solution, it's merely postponing the inevitable, which comes at a greater cost over time. Facing the shadow, however, isn't about judging or punishing yourself. It's about accepting that we all have imperfect parts, and that's okay. For example, someone who rejects their anger might notice it erupting uncontrollably at the worst moments, but by confronting this emotion, they might discover that anger carries an important message. Perhaps it's tied to boundaries that haven't been respected, or to a need for change. The shadow, after all, isn't just a repository of weaknesses. It also holds the potential to transform us. What do you see in others that you might be hiding in yourself? This question can be uncomfortable, but reflecting on it can lead to great insight. Because when we face what we've been avoiding, we begin to find a path to acceptance. Not just of what is good, but of what is real. How many times have you experienced coincidences that felt too meaningful to be mere chance? Like thinking of someone and, suddenly, they call you, or finding an unexpected solution to a problem just when you needed it most. These are synchronicities, moments when it feels like the universe is whispering directly to you. Carl Jung, who coined the term synchronicity, described these experiences as meaningful coincidences connecting external events to our internal state. He believed these events reflect a link between what we feel and what the world mirrors back to us. A famous example comes from his clinical practice when a patient was recounting a dream about a golden scarab. At that very moment, Jung heard a light tapping at the window, and upon opening it, he found a beetle resembling the one from her dream. To him, this coincidence marked a turning point in her treatment, as it reinforced a critical aspect of her inner work. But are these synchronicities really messages? Or are they just a way of finding meaning in chaos? It's a fair question. Still, it's hard to ignore how these events often occur at crucial moments, like lighthouses in the darkness, illuminating the next step. Think of a time when you were uncertain about a decision, and suddenly, something small, a conversation, a song, or even a forgotten object, helped clarify your path. At the same time, it's important to remember that synchronicities are guides, not destinations. Obsessing over them can lead to imbalance. Like seeking signs for everything and losing the ability to act independently, they should be treated as tools, not definitive answers. As Jung warned, the universe can reflect our desires and doubts, but the responsibility to interpret and decide lies solely with us. Is it just coincidence? Or is it an alignment between what you feel and what the world reflects? That's the question, because in the end, synchronicities remind us of something fundamental. We are connected to everything around us in ways we don't always understand. Recognizing them means embracing the fact that life is often more complex and more fascinating than we can predict. Psychic awakening, while captivating, is not a straightforward or risk-free journey. Often, what begins as a search for understanding can turn into a heavy burden. It's like building a house on a mountaintop without a solid foundation. No matter how tall or impressive it is, one strong wind can bring it all crashing down. One of the most common risks in this process is isolation. As someone dives deeper into spiritual practices or self-discovery, it's easy to become disconnected from the world. Endless meditations, constant reading on the subject, or even striving for emotional perfection can create a bubble, while the person may feel above worldly distractions. They might actually be distancing themselves from meaningful and necessary connections. Another pitfall is the obsession with light, trying to stay positive and enlightened all the time. The truth is, awakening isn't just about ascending, it's also about descending into the things we avoid. You can't escape your shadow without confronting its challenges. Someone clinging only to higher experiences might suppress essential emotions, like anger or sadness, or overlook basic needs, and this will eventually take its toll. Think about cases of spiritual burnout. Someone might overdo meditation or self-discovery exercises to the point of neglecting their body, relationships, or mental health. Instead of finding balance, they end up overwhelmed, like a bird trying to fly too high without realizing its wings are wearing out. Awakening isn't about escaping who we are. It's about integrating every part of ourselves, and integration requires balance. What happens when we ignore essential aspects of who we are? It's like playing an out-of-tune instrument. Even if the melody is right, something will still feel off. That's why grounding your awakening in practical everyday life is so important. The psychic journey can be deep, but it needs roots. Without them, what should set you free can end up trapping you instead. As we follow the path of self-discovery or spiritual practices, another subtle yet common danger emerges: the spiritual ego. It might sound contradictory. How can something meant to connect us to our essence actually fuel the ego? But that's exactly what happens when spirituality becomes another way to feel superior to others. Carl Jung warned about the risks of an inflated ego during the awakening process. This happens when someone uses their inner progress as a status symbol. Think of the person who believes they're on a higher level because they meditate daily, follow a strict diet, or avoid behaviors they consider less evolved, instead of humility and connection. Judgment creeps in, toward others and anything that doesn't fit their idea of perfection. The problem with spiritual ego is that it disconnects us from the essence of what awakening truly means. Instead of fostering growth, it creates a mask of superiority. For example, someone who practices yoga or meditation might begin to look down on others who don't follow the same lifestyle. Treating spirituality as a badge of nobility rather than a path of personal transformation. What does it really mean to be awakened? Is it about feeling superior to others or being at peace with yourself? The answer can be uncomfortable because spiritual ego often hides in plain sight. It masquerades as progress. But at its core, it's just another way of shielding ourselves from vulnerabilities that remain unintegrated. As Jung once said, the goal of individuation is to free the man from the false shell of the persona. But it should not be understood as a quest for perfection, rather as the full development of the individual. In other words, true awakening is a path of humility, not glory. Recognizing this requires honesty and a critical examination of our intentions. After all, genuine spirituality doesn't divide but connects. It doesn't elevate some above others, but reminds us that, at our core, we all share the same contradictions and potential. We are both light and shadow. It's a truth as simple as it is unsettling. Yet many of us spend our lives trying to be only good, ignoring or suppressing the parts of ourselves we find unacceptable. But what happens when we reject such an essential part of who we are? It doesn't disappear. It simply hides, waiting for the right moment to resurface. Carl Jung believed this duality is unavoidable, and that trying to suppress the shadow only leads to greater imbalance. He famously said, "There is no light without shadow, and no wholeness without imperfection." This means that accepting the shadow doesn't mean resigning ourselves to darkness. It means recognizing that it's part of the whole. We are like day and night. One cannot exist without the other. Think about emotions like anger or sadness, which we're often taught to avoid or suppress. A common example is someone who strives to be always kind, suppressing any signs of dissatisfaction. Over time, this person might accumulate so much frustration that an outburst becomes inevitable. It's like trying to hold down a balloon while continuing to fill it with air. Eventually, It bursts, accepting the shadow. However, doesn't mean being controlled by it. It's about understanding that within every emotion or impulse we consider negative, there's something to be learned. Anger, for instance, might reveal where our boundaries are being crossed. Sadness could be an invitation to slow down and reflect on what truly matters. The balance lies in realizing that we are not one or the other, but both. To live authentically, we need to integrate these parts of ourselves rather than fight against them. Accepting the shadow doesn't mean becoming dark. It means becoming whole. So, the question remains, what part of yourself are you rejecting out of fear of not being accepted by others? Accepting duality is the first step, but the true challenge lies in integrating it into who we are. What does it really mean to become whole? Imagine a puzzle with scattered pieces, where each piece tells a story. Some you're proud to show, while others you prefer to hide. The work of integration is about bringing all those pieces together, even the difficult ones, to see the full picture. Carl Jung called this process individuation, an ongoing journey of self-awareness and acceptance, where we move beyond just living through our social mask or persona and connect with our true essence. He never claimed it was easy. After all, who enjoys facing their own mistakes, insecurities, or fears? But ignoring them means living an incomplete life, as if parts of yourself are always left on the sidelines. Think about moments when you've learned something important about yourself. Maybe it was after a mistake that taught you about boundaries. Or perhaps it was realizing that even your flaws can be assets, depending on how you use them. A practical example, someone who sees themselves as stubborn might discover, through integration, that they're also resilient and determined. This work happens in the small moments of daily life. It's in forgiving yourself when something goes wrong, in recognizing your flaws without condemning yourself, and in celebrating your strengths without inflating your ego. It's understanding that you don't need to be perfect, just honest with yourself, because in the end, you don't need to become someone else. You just need to become who you already are, like pieces of a puzzle. The process is rarely linear. Some parts fall into place quickly, while others take time. But every step forward brings you closer to something more authentic. As Jung said, what you most need is found where you least want to look. Perhaps the missing piece lies precisely in the part you've been avoiding. Psychic awakening isn't a straight line with a clear endpoint. Instead, it's more like a spiral, where each turn takes you deeper into yourself as you progress. You revisit familiar places, but with new perspectives and lessons. What seemed clear at first might change, and what once felt confusing might finally make sense. This process has no shortcuts, nor a definitive destination. Often, when we think we've arrived, life presents a new challenge, asking us to face something we hadn't yet noticed. This isn't failure. It's the very nature of awakening. Jung famously said, "What we deny in ourselves controls us. What we accept frees us." Yet this freedom isn't static. It's a continuous cycle of learning and transformation. Think about patterns that seem to repeat in your life. Maybe you've faced recurring relationship issues, insecurities, or personal dilemmas that keep coming back. The goal isn't to avoid these cycles, but to notice how you approach them differently each time. With every turn of the spiral, you carry the lessons you've already learned. Even if the challenge feels the same, awakening is just that, a dance between light and shadow, progress and pause, acceptance and change. It's not about reaching the top of a mountain, but learning from each step of the climb, and sometimes the descent. It's a living movement, where the end of one cycle is merely the beginning of another. Are you ready to accept that awakening isn't a destination to be reached, but a state to be lived? Because in the end, it's not about completing this movement, but about allowing yourself to grow, change, and integrate every part of who you are. And perhaps this is the greatest truth of awakening. It has no end, because evolution is infinite. Psychic awakening isn't about finding ready-made answers or achieving a final state of perfection. It's a continuous process, full of twists and turns, light and shadow, learning and revisiting. It happens in the small details of daily life, in the questions we ask ourselves, the dreams that intrigue us, and the moments that challenge us to look beyond the surface. It isn't something reserved for a few, but a journey we are all connected to in different ways throughout life. The most important part of this path is understanding that it doesn't require speed or perfection. As we've seen, true transformation happens when we integrate all parts of ourselves, the ones we admire and the ones we avoid. It's like rebuilding an internal map, connecting points that once seemed unrelated, and in doing so, seeing who we truly are. If you've made it this far, I want to thank you. Reflecting on topics as deep and personal as this isn't easy, but your willingness to think about it is already a significant step. And remember, no one walks this path alone. We're all dealing with our own light and shadow, trying to find balance in a process that is never the same for everyone. Now, I want to leave you with one last thought. What inside you still needs to be heard? Sometimes the answers lie in the simplest things. In the dream that keeps lingering in your mind. In what bothers you most about others, or even in the coincidences that cross your path. Don't ignore these signs. They might be the starting point for something you didn't even realize you needed to understand. The journey of awakening, if we can call it that, never truly ends. Each cycle brings new challenges, but also new possibilities. So, keep exploring, reflecting, and accepting, because true awakening isn't about solving everything, but about allowing yourself to fully be who you are, with all your nuances. If this message resonated with you in any way, share your thoughts. Let's keep this conversation going. And once again, thank you for being here. May the balance between your light and shadow always be the compass in your search. Until next time.